Hi there! Welcome to our first Those Crazy Games Q&A. So, I've got a few questions that have come in through email and through YouTube comments, and I'm going to go through a few of those here today. So, let's get started. Christopher Onstad wrote in, "Wasn't there a sequel to Dungeons & Dragons? I thought I had seen one in a store once, but it could have been a dream." It wasn't a dream, unless you count maybe a nightmare or two. There were two sequels. I forget the years offhand. There was Wrath of the Dragon God was the second one, and the only real connecting thing between it and the first movie was Damodar is featured in it. Bruce Payne's character. Without the blue lips this time. And then the third one, Book of Wild Darkness, was a few years later. Both of them went directly to Sci-Fi Channel and then to video. So, there's that. If the show goes on long enough, we'll get to both of them. Don't worry about that. Further on, I understand completely why you won't specifically review podcasts, and that makes a whole lot of sense, but you've had a lot of experience in the podcasting industry and listening to podcasts. Would you consider maybe discussing what you look for in a podcast? Podcasting industry? Well, if it was an industry, I'd be making a lot more money at it, so that would be kind of awesome, actually. But we won't go into all that right now. What do I look for in a podcast? Interesting content. That can overcome audio quality, at least to a certain extent. If it's painful to listen to, that's something else, but AM quality I can deal with if I like what I'm listening to. The content varies a lot, obviously, and if they can put it in an interesting way, even localized stuff works, but it's probably easier to say that my biggest turnoff is making it incredibly localized to where you are, because there's one podcast that I listen to. I'm not going to name it, but its content is very community oriented towards a particular group, and which is fine. It's a group I'm interested in, but they have a lot of information towards the beginning of their show, dealing with their own local community, and that's all well and good, but it doesn't do me any good, and it's a lot to try to slug through to get to the stuff that I want to hear. And there have been other podcasts covering the same kind of topics that don't do that, so I've gravitated towards those instead. If there's a particularly interesting topic, I might download a single episode and go with that, but for the most part, keep it interesting, and and if you're interesting enough, then even the localized information is going to be cool with me, because it tells me more about, it shows me more about the producers than, and if it's producers I like, obviously, then so much the better. You seem extremely knowledgeable regarding your subject matter, which only makes sense considering all your experience. How much research do you find yourself doing for your reviews versus how much do you just know and maybe fact-check real quick? I do try to make sure that I fact-check, at the very least, the stuff. If I know it, then generally I will run with that, because, you've seen my collection. I've been accumulating that for a long time, over 20 years, maybe close, not quite 30, because it didn't really start exploding in size until around college. But generally, I'll at least check to make sure I get dates right, and proximity to different editions of a particular game. And there's some that I may not know a lot about at all, aside from the fact that I have it, and I'll go digging for things like possible supplements and that kind of thing. Wikipedia is probably my first go-to, followed by Board Game Geek or RPG Geek, and that may seem like a strange order to take them in, but generally I can tend to find a lot more interesting tidbits of information off of the Wikipedia page, if there is one. And sometimes that works better than others, but it's still... And if there's a controversy attached to a particular game or something, I'm more likely to find it on the Wikipedia page. Or just a more general Google search, which is sort of my third point, to try to find totally independent discussion of various games or whatever else I'm looking at. What is your favorite genre, and does it change depending on media type? I.e. RPG versus television versus book versus movie versus music versus video game, and etc. Wow, that's a question. My favorite genres really tend to be different depending on what I'm watching or reading or whatever. And it even varies over time, really. Movies and such, action adventure, especially like the... I remember, getting into feng shui back in the day and finding out about Hong Kong action movies. That was just mind-blowing to me at the time, seeing The Killer and Hard Boiled and all of that. So my movies tend towards that, no matter what the other trappings of it are, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi or whatever else. SF, sorry. Books, I do tend towards science fiction more, I think. I'm, non-fiction to an alternate history and that, but my collection seems to have gravitated mainly towards science fiction, with a few other entries into other things there. Music just doesn't really break into those kind of genres that easily. There are bits and pieces where you have science fiction-oriented or fantasy-oriented music, but that's more going to be more towards a style of music, and I try to stay pretty diverse on that. Growing up, when I was really young, I lived in a reasonably rural area, so country music was the thing. Discovered new wave and classic rock when we moved to Louisville. Ended up getting into hip-hop really heavily through late middle school, high school, early college. Got into the alternative thing doing college radio. So I've been all over the place as far as music goes. And video games, I'm not much into video games, honestly. And again, the topic's going to vary there, and that even then is more the types of games. I hate real-time strategy. I cannot deal with a game that I can lose before I've even really started. That's the kind of thing. I know that's probably not a great answer you're looking for, but I try to be fairly diverse in my genre interests. Iron Warmonger says, Mark, sorry, but Battletech was not the last Saturday morning cartoon based upon a game. Heavy Gear, the game by DreamPod 9, had a cartoon in the 2001. And so it did when I went to go and look it up. It's on Crackle as this records. That's a Sony-run, I think, pre-video channel. They drop ads into the shows they have on there. And I'll probably try checking that out at some point. He gave a little bit more information later on in the YouTube comments there. You can go look for that if you like. It's in the Saturday morning special episode, obviously. I still maintain that the whole Saturday morning cartoon phenomenon, as I described it, was not a thing by then. I'm not even sure exactly what day that went out, because it was a syndicated kind of thing, and it went for a while, nearly a year, like 40-some episodes, so... But yeah, I'll go check that out eventually. The one thing that I kind of drew from what I've read about it is that it, much like the Battletech one, ended up being this is a in-universe video show, kind of like, in this case, kind of like a professional wrestling kind of thing. So, it'll be interesting to see what the show looks like. And I'm going to have to actually familiarize myself with Heavy Gear, because that's one of the games I never really got into much. And our last few questions are from Florian Schwark. He starts off with our Mazes and Monsters book club entry. It says, Indeed, I wasn't aware the movie was based on a book. To be honest, without the internet, I wouldn't have been aware of the movie itself. Thank you for the education. But I have to admit I have some difficulties listening to you because I was too distracted trying to identify the blueprint in the background. Is it Optimus Prime or another Transformer, a battle mech, a rocket with its launch pad, or even a Corellian frigate? I try to position myself where you can see it a bit better now, hopefully. It's a battle mech. Back in the late 90s, maybe early-ish 90s, whenever the whole clans thing got started, FASA released a set of blueprints, this size blueprints, with 4 of the different Omni-mechs that the clans use, and this one particular is a Mad Cat. And hopefully you can see it fairly well on there. If not, well, I'll try to get a better picture of it in a future video. Another RPG podcast I very much enjoy is The Surly Grognards from Peter Bowman and Eric Carlson. And he gives a YouTube link which I will try to include, at least in the website entry. Peter Bowman is loosely associated with Channel Awesome, like the Nostalgia Critic and Linkara, but his episodes are released on YouTube only, which requires some effort to make offline listening possible. I think that's why he's more on the obscure side. And I'm going to have to go check that out at some point when I've got a moment to sort through and find some of those. Peter and Eric have been playing RPGs longer than I have even existed, and they're pretty much persons of authority on tabletop gaming for me. One recurring point in their banter is Peter's dislike for Palladium, especially its crunch, and as far as I remember, mostly the concept of mega damage. I listen to some other RPG podcasts like The Walking Eye, RPPR, and of course AGC, but I think now that none of them have got the same level of anger towards Palladium that Peter and Eric. Do you have an opinion on this matter? Or do you have an idea why a seasoned wargamer hates the system so much? And there is so much potential to get into trouble answering this question. So I want to note that I am not inexperienced with the Palladium system. I'm not coming from it from a position of hate. In fact, I still own all the books that I've had to sell off over the years. I've held on to my different Palladium games, which basically amounts to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Robotech, and Rifts. But I've played in a number of the settings over the years. That's one thing that even people who hate the system do tend to like the settings, with Rifts and Nightbane and a few of the others that they've done. Now you've got a couple of different things there. One is the crunch. And I actually like the basics of the Palladium system, the difference between hit points and structural damage capacity, sort of the life force versus actual physical damage, the way that initiative works, giving you multiple actions in a turn, and that kind of thing. There's a lot of neat stuff to be found there. The connection with skills and everything else could use a bit of an overhaul. The system could use some definite tuning, and this is a game that for little bits here and there have gone mostly unmodified since it came out in the 80s. And I'm not saying that it has to go all the way over to something like Fate or something like that, especially nowadays when you've got old school gaming making a resurgence, especially in the last few years. But it could stand to tune up its skill system, some of the connections between it and stats and things like that. It's kind of like, it's needed a real engine tune-up over the years, and their response has been to give it a new coat of paint and change the spark plugs. And and then there's lots of people who absolutely love the game. The fans are fanatical. That's kind of the whole definition of fans there. And I totally get that. And I've always said, if you love the game, go ahead and play it. I don't care which one it is, really, that much. And I do like Palladium. I want to see them do well. I do prefer other systems, and I have to say, I'm eagerly awaiting the Savage Worlds version of Rifts that's going to be coming out in a bit here. But anyway, the mega damage capacity thing is a whole other question, really, because that came about in the Robotech games, and I mentioned earlier the difference between hit points and structural damage capacity. The SDC would be things. The characters have that as well, but mainly that's something for vehicles, buildings, and structures. Structural damage capacity. Now, when they introduced Robotech, they added mega damage capacity, the basics of which is a mega damage point is, I think, 100 structural damage capacity. And obviously a point of mega damage is, 100 times a single point of structural damage. And the other notable thing about that was you had to use a mega damage weapon to damage a mega damage structure. So you couldn't just take a machine gun and wear a tank down, necessarily. And I've heard arguments where you could, because you can break all of the eye ports and stuff like that by constantly spraying it with bullets. I'm not worried about that. You're not really going to be putting a tank out of action with a machine gun. You may gouge the paint or something like that, but, woohoo. And the weapons that did mega damage were heavy guns, like tank guns, anti-tank missiles, other missiles, that kind of thing. And then they put out rifts, and one of the bits of crazy that I didn't like in rifts, and I'm saying that there's a lot of really good crazy in rifts, by the way. That is one of the most whacked out, wonderful settings I've ever run into. That's why I'm waiting for the Savage Worlds version so eagerly. But they applied the mega damage thing to personal armor and personal weapons. So you'd have a handgun that does mega damage. And, of course, you've still got character classes, at least in the original game. They may have modified that some in the Ultimate Edition and the later editions of it that have come along. Where you still have certain classes that are only dealing in SDC, which means that the MDC classes, if they get into a fight with the SDC classes, are going to vaporize the SDC classes right away. That's my particular problem with mega damage. I haven't had a chance to check out their show yet, so I can't really detail further what their issues may be, but that's kind of where I've been and that. And hey, maybe the controversy that comes from my explaining that will gain us viewers. Maybe not. I don't know. His last question, though, another thing that pops up now and then on my podcast, but I haven't yet encountered anywhere else. Diceless RPGs, especially Amber. Do you have any experiences with them, and could you share some stories about Diceless sessions going either surprisingly well or horribly wrong? I don't have a lot of direct experience with Diceless Games, and if anyone wants to share some stories, like he's asking here, I wouldn't mind narrating them. There's a whole genre of YouTube video of people taking creepypastas and other scary stories and just reading them over strange, rotating art and that, and I could do a few of those. If people want to send me your Diceless gaming stories or whatever else. I know that Hypericon, a convention that I've been to a number of times down in Nashville, Tennessee, they used to do a LARP involving Amber, but I don't know if that still goes on or not. But it was a very popular event there when it did. And I know that the RPG Buffet over at All Games Considered have played Amber, and I may have to get Mags to elaborate on that at some point on an episode over there, and maybe capture some audio and have some kind of presentation of it over here too. There have been a few other Diceless games that I've run into. There's a game by BTRC, I think it was called Epiphany. It's on my shelf. I'm not going to run over and grab it just right now. But you did more, it's more using finger gestures to do the random number stuff than other things like that. So yeah, that's my Diceless experience. It's one of the gaming areas that I am a little bit weak on. So, like I said, if anybody wants to share some Diceless gaming stories, good or bad, I can do some vlogs narrating those, certainly. If you've got any other questions in that, of course, the YouTube comments on all the various videos, I'll pluck things out of there to do Q&A episodes on every once in a while. The email still shows up in credits every once in a while. I'm probably going to transition away from that, do a new sort of general credits thing without that in it, because, I've gotten one email from that. That was from Florian, so... and honestly, the YouTube comments are probably a better way to handle that, so... so anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you've got more feedback or whatever, like I said, comments. Tell your friends about the show if you think that they would like it. And like the videos, spread them around. I'm kind of... we're getting towards 5 episodes in, maybe a bit more than that, depending on whether you count all the vlogs and all that kind of thing. And I'm going to get to start considering, am I going to do this past the holidays? And we're doing fairly well, as subscriber-wise. You see the number over there. I think we were at 29 the last I checked this as I record. Maybe we've clicked over to 30 since this got started. I'd love to have more. So, and of course, after the next episode, one next week, I'll get to start pushing to promote the thing a bit harder than I have. The whole Evo Terra rule of podcast promotion is wait until you have 5 episodes in the can and then do it. Then you can promote. But we'll see how that goes. I'm rambling on a bit too much now, so I'm cutting this off right here. Have a good time, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this. Keep rolling crits, and I'll see you on the flip side.